I had spent 3 hours in front of the mirror for a man who, in some bone-deep way, would leave. The dress was ivory silk, the kind that whispers when you walk, and I had saved it for the rehearsal dinner at the Moretti family estate on the hill above Lake Como. I had met his mother exactly once, at a small cafe in Milan the previous October, and she had touched my hand across a marble table and said I had kind eyes. I had worn that sentence like a medal for 4 months, not understanding it was a warning. The estates at the end of a long Cypress Avenue planted the year Adrian's grandfather first lost money, and refused to be embarrassed about it. When the car rolled in, I tried not to cry in the back seat like a girl who already felt the ending in her wrists. I was 28 years old. I had a degree in industrial design, a job I loved designing kitchens for a small studio, an apartment I had paid for myself, and a stack of novels I had not yet read because I had been too busy becoming the kind of woman Adrian's family would be willing to admit. None of that was supposed to matter this weekend. The weekend was about fitting in, becoming a Moretti, learning what fork to use at a table where the wrong fork could be remembered for decades. Adrian had not held my hand when I stepped out of the car. He had been on his phone the entire drive, and when I asked if his mother was in a good mood, he had said, vaguely, "She is always in a mood, you know that." I did not know that. I climbed the marble steps behind him and felt, for the first time, the specific weight of a house that did not want me in it. Before the rehearsal dinner began, Adrian took me into a small sitting room off the main hall, shut the door, and announced the wedding was off. He did it the way someone announces a meeting cancellation, politely, on schedule, with near-zero emotional weather. He said he was sorry. He said it 3 times, and every sorry sounded like a coin he was paying to get out of a toll booth. He did not sit down. I did. He stood with his back to the tall window and told me there was someone else. He said it had happened slowly. He said it was nobody's fault. He said he had not planned it. I asked him who. He hesitated for half a second, and then said a name I had never heard before. He said she was a countess from Turin, divorced, 10 years older than me, and that he had felt, for the first time in his life, what it meant to stand next to someone who knew the rules of his family without being taught. He did not say it cruelly. He said it geometrically. Every sentence had a shape and a purpose and an exit. I watched the geometry and felt my life rearrange itself behind my ribs. I slid my engagement ring off. The diamond was small by Moretti standards. A 1/4 carat my grandmother had helped me afford, and Adrian had chosen it himself because, he had said at the time, he wanted something that felt like me. I held it out to him, and he stared at it as if he had never seen jewelry before. He did not take it. He told me to keep it, that it was only a stone, that it did not mean anything now. I closed my fist around it. I could feel the prongs bite into my palm. He told me I would find someone else, eventually, and that I should not think less of myself. I said, more quietly than I had meant to, that I thought I already had. I left the sitting room and walked down a long corridor lined with oil paintings of men who looked exactly like Adrian but older, meaner, better tailored. I passed the kitchen. I passed a doorway where 2 of his aunts were debating the rehearsal toasts. I passed a butler who looked at me with the expression of a man being paid a great deal of money not to make a sound. I reached the front hall, where the rehearsal dinner candles had already been laid out in tall silver branches, and I realized, with a sick swoop in my stomach, that in 20 minutes every member of the family would be sitting down to celebrate a wedding that was already dead. I turned toward the front door. I was not going to give them the chance to do the math with me in the room. I did not get far. Voice cut across the marble like the crack of a glass someone had not expected to break. Nobody leaves yet. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The acoustics of the hall had been engineered by men who understood that even a murmur, in the right stone, can land like a sentence. The butler straightened. The aunts fell silent. 2 cousins in the corner stopped laughing. Adrian, still half a corridor behind me, turned a shade of pale I had never seen on another human being. I recognized that pallor. I had seen him wear it exactly once before, on the day he had introduced me to his uncle at a restaurant in Milan, and the uncle had looked at our entwined hands for 1 full second too long, before saying nothing at all. His name was Lorenzo Moretti, and he was the reason the family still had a name at all. He was 44 years old, more or less, and the only time anyone in the family admitted their own age was when forced to buy a passport. He was the younger brother of Adrian's father, the head of the family's commercial interests in 3 countries, and the man whispered about in certain rooms as someone you did not want to owe a favor to. He had never married. He had been engaged twice, and both engagements had ended the week before the weddings. The 2 women had moved to different continents within the year, and were never spoken of again except by the aunts, who kept a mental ledger of every slight the family had absorbed. He did not explain himself. Explaining yourself is what people do when they do not believe they are owed silence. Lorenzo believed he was owed silence the way other men believe they are owed a handshake, and the family had, over 40 years, learned to extend it before he asked. He walked in from the east corridor with the slow, almost theatrical calm of a man who had been born knowing how to enter rooms. He wore a black suit cut close to his body, a black dress shirt unbuttoned one button too many, no tie, no watch on the wrist that had once held a watch his father gave him. He smelled of cedar and cold coffee. The room organized itself around him. The butler set down the silver polish and disappeared through the service door. Lorenzo looked at Adrian. I had not seen Lorenzo Moretti look at another human being before, and I am still not sure that words do the experience justice. It was not anger. Anger is hot and quick and specific to a wound. It was a long, even, structural disappointment, the kind a cathedral has in a cracked marble column that everyone can see but no one is allowed to discuss in front of visitors, he said, almost conversationally. You broke your promise to her. Adrian tried to defend himself. He used his hands. He apologized with his voice. He arranged his face into the expression he had practiced since childhood for occasions when his uncle was watching. None of it worked. Lorenzo did not interrupt him by speaking louder. He interrupted Adrian by simply no longer listening, which is a thing only a few people in any room can do without raising a finger. Adrian felt it halfway through his third sentence, the exact moment his uncle's eyes drifted a quarter-inch to the left of his face and stayed there, looking at nothing in particular, the way a man looks at a window he has decided not to open. Adrian stalled. He swallowed. He looked at me for the first time since we had been in the sitting room, and the look was not the look of a man who loved a woman. It was the look of a man who had just noticed the geometry of his own trap. He tried again. He said the relationship had run its course. He said it had been mutual in spirit. He said people change. Lorenzo let one corner of his mouth move a millimeter in a direction that was almost, but not quite, a smile. Then he turned away from his nephew like a man closing a book he had no intention of recommending. He turned toward me. I felt the weight of his gaze on my skin like a change in barometric pressure. I had been wearing mascara for 90 minutes, and I could feel it pulling at the outer corners of my eyes, which had begun to sting in the way eyes sting just before a person decides not to cry. I did not look away. I had learned in my 20s that dignity has nothing to do with pride. It is just the choice to let another person see you shaking without explaining why. Lorenzo's gaze dropped, almost imperceptibly, to my left hand. I saw him register it. The bare ring finger. The pink, slightly indented band of skin where the engagement ring had lived for 9 months. His expression did not change, but something behind it tightened the way a string tightens when the tuning peg is turned 1/2 turn, and I understood, in a place deeper than I had words for, that the man had just made a decision. He walked toward me. It is difficult to describe what it felt like for him to cross that distance, because he did it without hurry, and yet the room contracted around him, as if the air itself were being drawn into a different shape. People I had not noticed became visible. A woman in lavender who was breathing shallowly near the staircase. A teenage cousin whose hands were in fists inside his pockets. Maid at the far end with her tray lowered in mid-step. Adrian's mother appeared on the upstairs balustrade, and placed one hand on the banister like a woman watching a storm enter her living room. Lorenzo stopped in front of me. He did not ask permission. He did not announce what he was about to do. He reached with his right hand toward his own left hand, and from the third finger he slid a ring I had only ever seen once before. And that once had been from across a ballroom, when I had been too new to the family to know what I was looking at and too engaged to ask. It was a wide band of black and silver with a single inlay of brushed gold running through it like a vein of warmth through dark stone. The pattern was unbroken. His mother had worn it for 40 years. His grandmother had worn it before her. It was not a gift in the way people use that word. It was not a trophy. It was a flag. He held it in front of me, at eye level, my left hand at my side. He did not ask me to raise my hand. He waited. I stared at the ring. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I could hear, absurdly, a clock somewhere in a back office ticking off the seconds like a man counting a vote. I whispered, "Why are you showing me that?" He did not answer. He reached down and took my left hand in both of his. His hands were warm, which surprised me, and there was a tiny roughness on the inside of his thumb, which surprised me more, because I would have bet those hands had never done a day's manual work in their 44 years. He slid the ring onto my finger, over the pink groove where the engagement ring had been, slowly, with the kind of attention you give to a thing you intend to last. Adrian's face went through a color I did not know human skin could manage. It was not red, the way anger paints a man. It was something between ash and milk. The color of a man watching his own future announce itself in front of him and realizing, too late, that the future had already been decided by someone whose opinion outranked his by generations of silence. His mother on the landing made a sound that was not a word, more like the air being punched out of a room by the closing of a heavy door. His two aunts in the corner clutched at each other's forearms in a way that sent 3 sets of bracelets sliding down toward the wrists. His cousin in the dark suit behind me whispered a single swear under his breath in a dialect I half remembered from my grandmother's kitchen in the hills above Naples. The maid at the far end of the hall quietly set her tray down on the side table and left through the service door. It was, I would later realize, the first time in my life I had watched an entire family feel the same thing at the same instant. It is not a sensation I recommend. I looked up at Lorenzo. He was still holding my hand, lightly, the way you hold something that is finally resting on the right shelf. I felt his thumb brush, only once, across the side of the ring. I whispered, "You can't be serious." He answered in a tone so low and so even that it almost sounded like a vow delivered to no one in particular. "I've never been more serious in my life." Then, and this is the part that comes back to me in fragments at 3 in the morning when I cannot sleep, he raised his voice 1 full register for the entire room. "From this moment forward she has my protection, and my name, if she wants it." He did not say if she would like it. He did not say if she agrees. He said, if she wants it. He left the decision in my hands, even as he had just put a ring on my finger that rendered the decision almost invisible. I have spent the years since trying to understand that trick, and I believe now it was not a trick at all. It was a vow. He was not pretending to give me a choice. He was, in fact, giving me one, which is something Adrian had never done in 3 years together. He had given me the shape of a future, and told me to step into it because it was warm, and had never asked whether I wanted the warmth. Lorenzo was asking, in front of 40 people, whether I wanted this. The question was mine, and it was real, and he meant it. I did not answer him in public. I did not answer him with my mouth. I answered him by turning the ring on my finger, slowly, until the gold vein ran down the exact center of the back of my hand, where it would catch the light of any chandelier I ever walked under for the rest of my life. Lorenzo saw me turn it. He nodded, half an inch, the kind of nod that almost does not happen, and he turned to his nephew. He said one more thing. He said, "Adrian, you will go upstairs and you will wait in your mother's parlor until I send for you. You will not eat dinner tonight. You will not use your phone. You will not leave the room." Then he brought my hand up to his arm, and he walked me out of the hall. And the family parted for us the way water parts for a boat that has just dropped anchor in the wrong harbor. He walked me out of the hall, down the marble corridor, past the paintings in reverse order this time, past the kitchen where a sous chef looked up from a tray of canapes with the expression of a man who had just seen a saint walk past with a knife in his right hand. We did not speak. We went out through a side door and into the garden, which was enormous and smelled of lemon trees and river water, and the particular kind of jasmine his grandmother had planted the year Lorenzo was born. The rehearsal dinner had been cancelled in the 12 minutes since his announcement. I knew this because as I stood in the garden I could hear, very faintly, the staff beginning the very long, very Italian job of putting out candles by the hundreds. He led me to a stone bench under a magnolia tree and told me to sit. I sat. He did not sit. He stood with 1 foot on the bench and 1 elbow on his knee, like a man surveying something he had been planning to find for a long time. He looked at my face in the dusk light, the way a man reads a sentence he intends to memorize. I asked him finally, "Why?" I said it the way you say it when you have rehearsed it 40 times, and it still does not sound right in your mouth. I told him I understood he wanted to make a point to Adrian, that he wanted to show the family that loyalty has consequences, that he wanted to use me as a mirror in which his nephew could see the cost of betrayal. I told him I was grateful for the gesture, and that I would return the ring on Monday, and disappear from the family's life entirely, and he would not need to think about me again. He listened to all of it. He listened the way a man listens to a long-distance weather report for a country he has already left. Then he said, "Is that really what you believe?" I said it was. He nodded slowly, as if he had been told where the thermostat was broken in the house but had not yet decided whether to fix it. He said, "The ring I put on your finger belonged to my mother. I knew this. Everyone in the family knew this. I had seen it in photographs of her that lined the upstairs hallway. He said, "No one outside the immediate bloodline has ever worn it." I knew that too. I had heard his mother say it once, 2 summers earlier at the lake, with the tone of a woman deciding not to repeat herself. He said, "I am aware of what that means." I asked him then why he had done it, not the why of the gesture in the hall, which I understood at least cosmetically, but the why of the choice of ring. He looked at me, and for the first time that evening, I saw something move across his face that looked less like authority and more like the slow tilt of a man being pressed against a window by a wind he had not expected. He told me the story of the ring. He told it the way he did most things in life. Without drama, without decoration, in long sentences that sounded like they had been edited by someone who believed fewer words were more honest, and who had been raised on a particular kind of silence the family called the clean line. The ring had been forged by his grandfather during a period the family did not discuss in front of guests and barely discussed in front of each other. The black and silver was melted from a service revolver his grandfather had carried for 22 years and retired on the day his first son was born. Because, as the grandfather had written once in a letter preserved in the upstairs drawer, a man who has just held his child should not also be holding a gun. The vein of gold had been alloyed with a piece of his grandmother's wedding band, which meant the ring pulled 2 lives together inside its body the way a coastline pulls 2 seas. His mother had worn it the day she married his father. She had worn it the day his father died, at the funeral home, with his hand still warm inside hers, refusing to let the staff take it off her finger for any reason. She had worn it every single day for 31 years. It had been taken off her hand the morning she died and given to Lorenzo in a back room by a priest who had known the family for 4 decades, who handed it over without ceremony because, as the priest said then and would say only once, ceremony has been done. The work of the ring begins now. Lorenzo told me he had worn it on his own hand for 3 years, and that he had not decided to take it off until he walked down the east corridor of his brother's estate tonight, and saw me standing under the wrong chandelier, 3 inches taller than I was at the rehearsal breakfast, refusing to look smaller than I was. He said all of this in the same calm, almost amused tone, as if he were discussing the price of a used car or the weather on a lake he had crossed 1,000 times. I listened. I felt the ring on my finger, which had warmed to my temperature within minutes, as if it had always been waiting for skin it was willing to trust. I said, "Then why me?" He looked at me and said without a pause, without a breath, without the slightest preparation, "Because you treated everyone in this house kindly when nobody was watching." I asked him what he meant by that. He said he had spent 18 months watching me in this family's orbit, at restaurants, at holidays, at his brother's birthday, at the small church on the hill where his mother made him take her every Sunday for 31 years. He said he had watched me call the driver by his name and not his title. He had watched me ask the cook about her daughter's exam. He had watched me move his mother's chair 2 inches to the left when the afternoon sun came through the window and straight into her eyes, and then move it back 2 inches when the sun moved without being asked. He had watched me fold a napkin at dinner in the shape the family preferred, even though I had grown up folding napkins in a different shape entirely. He had watched me do these things before the engagement, during the engagement, and he said, and this is the sentence that broke me open, "I would have watched you continue to do them long after the engagement if Adrian had been smart enough to leave you alone." I asked him again, smaller this time, almost apologetically, why he had said nothing. I said I had been engaged to Adrian for 11 months. I said there had been dinners, birthdays, ferry rides on the lake, 3 separate summer afternoons at his mother's garden, and he had been at every one. I had been introduced to him as Adrian's fiancé at least 4 times. I said, "If you saw all of that, why didn't you say anything sooner?" He was quiet for a long time. I could hear a frog in the garden. I could hear, faintly, a car starting in the driveway below us. He said, with no ornament at all, "Because you belonged to someone else, until tonight." He said it in a tone that was neither gentle nor cruel. It was simply true, the way coordinates are true. He continued, "Tonight, after what Adrian did to you in that sitting room, you did not belong to anyone. You were standing in a hallway full of people who had just watched you be discarded, and you were still wearing the same face you wore when you walked in. You did not beg them to stay. You did not cry in front of them. You did not ask the aunts for permission. You tried to leave with what was left of you, and what was left of you, I should tell you now, was more than anyone in that hall has ever managed to bring back from a public wound. I saw that face when I came down the east corridor. I have been looking for that face my entire life, and I did not know what it looked like until tonight." I did not speak. He let me not speak. He reached over and turned the ring on my finger 1/4 turn so that the gold vein ran down the center of the back of my hand, where it would be visible to anyone I ever shook hands with for the rest of my life, he said, very quietly. You think I put this ring on your finger because he broke your heart? That is one version of tonight. I put it there because I could not stand watching another man lose what I had already fallen in love with. I felt each word on my skin in the order it was said. I had not known I was capable of feeling each word of a sentence separately. I had not known a sentence could do that to a person. I sat on the bench. He stood. The garden smelled of lemon trees and the small river the family owned an easement to, and the faintest trace of the magnolia planted the year Lorenzo was born by his mother as a private joke with his father, who had said, "If the tree blooms, the boy will be impossible." The tree had bloomed every year. Lorenzo had, by most measures, become impossible. He looked at me and said, "Are you hungry?" I said, suddenly and completely, that I was. He nodded once and offered me his hand. I took it. He walked me back into the house through the service entrance, past the kitchen's back door, and I saw the cook, who had worked for the family for 33 years, whose name was Gina, who had raised 2 sons and buried one, and was the only person in the estate who ever called Lorenzo by his full first name. Look up from a tray of sliced lemons and see us enter together, and I saw her face do a thing I had not seen an adult face do since I was a child. She did not smile. She nodded, once, the way women nod to women in kitchens when they understand something has been settled, and then she went back to her lemons. We ate standing up at the butcher block. Gina made us 2 plates and set them down with the firm, not negotiable kindness of a woman who had decided what we were having before we arrived. She called Lorenzo by his full first name, which no one else in the family did, and he called her by hers. She addressed us both in dialect and then, catching herself, switched to formal Italian for my benefit, and Lorenzo said, "She can take the dialect, Gina. She understood the cook's daughter's exam without my help." Gina looked at me and said something short and warm in a sentence I will not translate here because it belongs to her and to that kitchen. We ate burrata and prosciutto and a peach she had cut into quarters in a way that made the fruit look like a flower. He poured me half a glass of wine from a bottle that had been open since morning. He ate like a man who had not eaten since yesterday. I realized he probably had not. I realized he had probably known what was going to happen tonight before I had even put on the dress, and that he had spent at least 24 hours making sure the rest of the family did not know, because, he said later, an ambush announced ahead of time only works in opera. I asked him how long he had known about Adrian's plan. He said 2 weeks. I asked him why he had not warned me. He said, "Because a warning would have made you feel small. You would have looked for confirmation in the wrong place. You would have stayed longer than you should have, hoping I was lying. You would have asked Adrian if it was true, and he would have lied to you beautifully, the way Adrian lies when he is buying time. And you would have believed him, because you did not yet know the exact angle at which he lies." I asked him how he could be sure. He said he had been watching Adrian lie for 32 years, since the boy was 7. He said he knew each of his nephew's lies the way a man knows his own handwriting, and that tonight's lie had been a particular type, the type that starts with a compliment about the kitchen and ends with the name of a hotel in Turin. I felt the ring shift slightly on my finger as I set my glass down. I felt the band of warmth around the gold vein pulse, as if gold had a heartbeat, which I am still not certain it doesn't. He drove me home that night in a black car with a driver who did not speak to either of us and who Lorenzo addressed by his first name, which made the driver smile in the rearview mirror for the first time in the 4 years Lorenzo had been using him. He sat in the back with me and did not put his arm around me. He did not put his hand on my knee. He did not make a single gesture of intimacy because he understood, even then, in the back of his own car, that I had been touched by men all day in ways I had not consented to, by glances, by decisions, by the weight of a family moving around me like expensive furniture, and he did not want to be another one. He sat a respectable distance away and watched the lake unwind beside us in the dark. I watched the lake too. I asked him what would happen tomorrow. He said the family would move through its stages. He said his sister-in-law would call her sisters. He said the aunts would call the cousins. He said the cousins would call the lawyers. He said my name would be mentioned in 3 different languages by morning. He said none of that mattered to him. I asked him what did. He said, "That you know you have somewhere to sit in this." He dropped me at my apartment at 11:46. He told me, from the front seat, to lock the door behind me. He did not come up. He did not ask to come up. He did not even look up at the window to see whether I had turned the lights on. I understood, even then, that this was a man who had decided I would be safer if he did not know which window I lit, because knowing which window I lit would make me a coordinate he could be forced to surrender, and Lorenzo did not intend to surrender me. I went inside. I locked the door. I stood in my hallway with my shoes in one hand and the ring on the other, and I listened to the elevator settle on the ground floor. I thought about the pink band where my engagement ring had been, and how it was now covered in black and silver and brushed gold. I thought about the man who had put it there, and the mother who had worn it for 31 years, and the grandmother who had died wearing it, and the grandfather who had melted down a revolver and a wedding band to make it. I thought about all of that while standing in my hallway in an ivory dress that was no longer about a rehearsal dinner. I poured myself a glass of water. I drank it standing up. I set the glass down. I pulled my hair out of the way it had been pinned for the rehearsal dinner and let it fall. I took off the ivory dress and folded it the way my mother had taught me to fold good clothes, in thirds, with the silk inside out, and I put it at the bottom of a drawer I did not use. I put on a t-shirt. I sat at my kitchen table. I looked at the ring on my left hand. I rotated it until the gold vein caught the light of the small lamp I'd bought at a flea market 6 years earlier. I sat there for 40 minutes without speaking. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I did not look at my phone. I sat there until I understood, in a way that did not need to be spoken in any language, that the night had finished, and a week had just begun, and the week would be longer than the night by a factor that I had not yet measured. The next morning I called in sick to my studio, which I had never done in 4 years of employment, and I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold, because every 3 minutes I rotated the ring on my finger and watched the gold vein catch the light. I told myself, out loud, that I should return it. I told myself, out loud, that this was an act. I told myself, out loud, that I would not become a story in a family I had not chosen. I told myself all of it, and then I felt the ring pulse against my finger again, and I knew I would not return it. I knew it the way a person knows when a door that has been closed their whole life has finally been opened from the other side. I picked up the phone. I called Lorenzo at 9 in the morning, which is the hour his family had always been led to believe he did not answer the phone at. He answered on the second ring. I told him I wanted to choose him. I told him I was not sure that was the smart thing to do. I told him I did not care. He was quiet for almost a full minute. I could hear, faintly, what I think was a kettle being set on a stove in his kitchen. He said, "Then come to the house. Come at noon. I will feed you lunch. We will tell no one." I said, "Okay," I said. "And if anyone sees me?" He said, "Then they will see me choosing to stand next to the woman I have chosen." I hung up. I took a shower, put on a blue dress that had no ceremony in it, a dress I had bought at a thrift store the previous spring for a friend's birthday, and which had, between then and now, become the most comfortable dress I owned. I left the apartment in a cab. I did not take the ring off. I did not cry on the way. I did not feel small. When I arrived at the estate at noon, the magnolia tree was still in flower, and the bench was still there, and the lemon trees still smelled like they had been promised something. Lorenzo was waiting for me at the side door with 2 cups of espresso and a face that had, for the first time in my memory, something unreadable in it that might have been called relief. He handed me a cup. He did not say good morning. He did not say good afternoon. He said, "You came." I said, "Of course I came." He leaned his shoulder against the doorframe and looked at me for a long time, the kind of long time a person looks at a thing they have decided they are going to be looking at for some years. Then he said, "I told you last night I would not promise you anything. I am telling you again today. I am telling you I have chosen you. I am telling you I will spend the rest of my life working to deserve that. I am not asking you to trust me yet. I am asking you to let me earn it." I drank the espresso. I leaned against the doorframe next to him. I told him the truth, which was that I had come to the house with the ring on my finger and no plans and no luggage and the ivory dress already in a drawer I would not open for at least a year. I told him I had decided, standing in my hallway again in a different light, that I was done trying to be chosen by people who were not going to choose me back. He put his espresso cup down on the bench. He put his hand out. I put mine in his, on top of the ring. He said, "Then it never has to be temporary." I said, "And I do not want it to be." He turned to walk me into the house. We went in through the kitchen again, past Gina, who was plating lunch and who told Lorenzo, in dialect, that he had forgotten to eat breakfast that morning and that she was personally insulted. He called her by her first name. She pretended not to notice me. I noticed, in the small glance she gave me over the rim of her glasses, that she had decided something about me, and the decision was final. I tucked my hand under his arm. We walked through the back corridors of the estate toward a room I had never been in before, where lunch was already set for 2 people at a small table facing the garden. The room was not a room the family used for entertaining. It was a private room Lorenzo had inherited from his mother, who had used it, according to the cook, for reading letters and for telling her husband things she did not want even the staff to hear. The walls were paneled in a dark walnut that had warmed with age. The window faced the magnolia tree, which was, at that moment, blooming in the way magnolias bloom only in the days after rain. He gave me the chair with the better view. He sat across from me. He unfolded his napkin. He folded his napkin. He unfolded it again, as if the gesture had been interrupted in his childhood, and he had never quite finished it. The cook brought the first course. We did not speak for a long time. We ate. We drank. We looked out at the garden as if we had been doing this for years. I reached across the table and touched the back of his hand. He did not flinch. He did not turn his hand over the way a man turns his hand over when he wants to be kissed on the wrist. He simply let me touch the back of his hand, the way a man lets a person touch him when he has been waiting most of his life to be touched that way. He said, "If you stay, will you tell me the truth?" I said, "Every day that you let me." I pulled the ring off my finger and set it on the table between us, the gold vein catching the window light at the perfect angle. He looked at it. He did not reach for it. He said, "Leave it there. I watched you wear it for 24 hours. I want to know if you can take it off and still choose me without it." I sat with my hand closed around nothing, and I stared at the ring on the table, and I felt every hour I had ever been touched wrong by anyone, and I waited until my hand opened again, and I slid the ring back onto my finger, and I said, "I can." He reached across the table and held my hand for the first time the way you hold a hand when you intend to do it for years. We ate lunch. Gina came and went. The garden outside got louder with birds. Somewhere inside the house a clock I had not heard before started chiming noon. He gave me the heartbreak. Lorenzo gave me the ring. And somehow, on a small table at the Moretti estate on a Saturday in spring, with my hand in his and the ring back on my finger and the window open to the garden, he gave me my heart back. I answered him in the plainest Italian I knew, which is enough for kitchens and for chapels and for the kinds of truth that do not survive translation. He almost laughed. The almost laugh, I would learn over the next several years, was as close to a public sound of joy as Lorenzo Moretti had ever made in front of another person. We finished the second course. Gina brought cheese and a small glass of dessert wine she had been saving for an occasion that had just announced itself. She poured 2 glasses without asking. Lorenzo watched with the expression of a man who had just been out-generaled in his own kitchen and was enjoying it. He walked me back through the kitchen for the 3rd time that day, past a window that had begun to show the first orange of the late afternoon. We stood at the side door again, the one where he had been waiting for me with 2 espressi at noon. He did not kiss me. He did not hold my hand a second longer than he needed to. He said, "Tomorrow, same time, bring nothing. Bring only the dress you wore this morning." I said, "I will wear it again." He looked at me, and for the 2nd time that day something moved across his face that looked less like authority and more like the slow tilt of a man being pressed against a window by a wind he had, on this occasion, expected. He said, "Good, keep it that way." The driver brought the car around. I sat inside. He stood outside with one hand on the roof of the car. He did not get in. He looked at me for what I now understand was an unreasonable number of seconds and then said, "I will see you tomorrow." I said, "I will see you tomorrow." The driver started the engine. The car pulled away. I watched him in the rearview mirror until the Cypress Avenue hid him, and I realized, in the way you realize things in rearview mirrors, that I had not been watching the man when he wanted to be watched. I had been watching the building behind him. I had been watching the estate. I had been, again, in spite of everything, trying to fit into a room that was not mine. That night, in my apartment, I opened a can of beans and ate them standing at my counter with my shoes still on because I had not yet taken them off. I ate half the can before I realized what I was doing. I put the rest in the fridge for tomorrow's lunch, which I told myself would be at the studio, and which I knew, before I'd finished the sentence, would not be at the studio. I looked at the ring on my finger, rotated it once, and went to bed at 9. I did not dream about Adrian. I did not dream about the family. I dreamed about a kitchen I had not yet designed, with a long marble counter, 3 stools, and a window facing a magnolia tree. And a man at one of the stools who did not turn when I entered, because he had been waiting for me and was not surprised. I woke at 6. I went to work. I drew a kitchen for a young couple who wanted a breakfast nook. The nook was small but warm, and I drew it so the morning sun came in from the east in the exact way it had come into the room I had dreamed about. I worked the whole morning without thinking about the estate, which is the only reason I knew I had made a decision. Wherever a person stops thinking about you, it is because they have already decided they will see you again. I went home at 6, put on the blue dress. I took the cab. I arrived at the estate at 6:15, which is not noon, and not midnight, and not the kind of hour that matters in the world I had been raised for. The hour that mattered was the one in which a man was waiting at a side door with 2 small cups, and the calm, certain face of a man who had been waiting his whole life for a specific person to arrive in a specific dress. He handed me the espresso. He said, "You are early." I said, "I am late. I am just bad at the math." He almost laughed again. I took it as a fact that I had earned. We ate dinner in the same room. We did not talk about Adrian. We did not talk about the family. We talked, instead, about kitchens, about basil, about whether lemons taste better picked at dawn or at dusk, about whether Gina had been right about the bread. I went home at 11. He drove me himself this time, in his own car, with the window open. He did not hold my hand. He did not try to kiss me. He did not put his hand anywhere it had not been invited. He dropped me at my door and said, "Tomorrow. Same time." I said, "Tomorrow." I went inside. I locked the door. I stood in my hallway in my shoes and blue dress and heard his car pull away. In the weeks that followed, Adrian did not call. His mother called once, and Lorenzo answered on my behalf with a sentence in dialect I will not translate, and she did not call again. The aunts stopped calling. The cousins sent flowers. Gina kept cooking for everyone every day, the way she had been doing for 33 years. The rhythm of my week had just changed. He had given me the heartbreak. He had given me the ring. And somewhere between the second cup of espresso and the third turning of the ring on my finger, he had given me the rest of my life, which I was now going to have to learn to live in, one blue dress at a time.